First you dance, then you hunt. Next on Wyoming Chronicle. Hello, I'm Richard Ager. Welcome to Wyoming Chronicle. Hunting. It's one of the most ancient pursuits known to man. And once a key to survival, it has become a sport rich in tradition. And one of the best known hunting traditions began here in Wyoming as a modest idea around a campfire. We'll talk about the sport of hunting and more in a moment. But first, that little idea that grew. When you only get one shot, you better make it a good one.
Just hair right of center and about 4 inches high.
Okay.
For 69 years, hunters from near and far have gathered for the last days of summer in Lander, Wyoming. They have come to continue the tradition of the One-Shot Antelope Hunt.
The Wounded Warrior teams.
The goal? Several teams of 3 men, and they are all men, all hunting separately, must down an antelope with one shot.
Ooh, shot a little low. No pressure now.
The hunt is now a major event, but it began with a rivalry between Harold Evans and his friend Harold Dahl.
Well, I think it was a competitive thing between him and Harold Dahl that started it.
Mel Anderson knew Harold Evans in his later years.
They were just competitive people, and they hunted together, they were good friends, and that's what got us started. I understand over a campfire one night, he was talking about what people that had the old single-shot guns and the Indians with their arrows, they had one shot. They didn't eat that day, so.
It became a battle for bragging rights between the governors of Wyoming and Colorado. This year, Colorado raised the stakes by donating a new trophy.
He and I didn't perform at our best last year, and so I really love the fact that he's got this traveling trophy, but it's additional pressure on us, John.
Well, I'm a great believer that it's very important to be competitive on little things so that you can collaborate and work together on the big things.
Just getting in can be tough.
To get invited as a team here is quite a feat.
All right, Cotton.
And first way to do it is to have some good connections. So luckily, I knew 2 board members.
The hunt has also attracted many celebrities. 50 years ago, it was Roy Rogers. This time, TV actor Gerald McCraney came to shoot.
I love that there is this sort of really American tradition about this particular hunt thing, and I love that we have this here.
The night before the hunt, all the hunters gather for a ceremony conducted by the Shoshone Indian tribe.
Good evening and welcome to the legend of the hunt. While the white man has a gun that speaks thunder and kills game at distances far beyond the flight of the truest arrow shot from the strongest bow, pulled by the most powerful arm. All of these men have learned to love and respect their red brothers and are anxious to help the Indians so that much meat may be brought back to the Shoshones and that there shall be enough for all.
So the Shoshone bless the hunt and the single bullet given to each hunter. All then begin the dance. At 6:30 a.m., the hunting begins.
Each hunter has an hour to hunt. Dwayne has the first hour. That's why we started at 6:30. His hour is over at 7:30. At that point, the other hunter takes over.
Once a hunter takes his shot, then the next hunter takes over for the duration of the hunt until he also makes a kill. He's hit, I think.
He's hit.
He's down.
8:35.
Nice buck.
I don't know that you want pictures of it. Yeah. No, I don't think so.
We'll take a hint and move on. All the preparation and stalking the antelope leads up to this event, the victory banquet, where the victors receive their honors and the losers make excuses. The winning team, the Wounded Warriors.
When a person goes to war and comes back as a veteran, they have that right to wear an Eagle War bonnet.
The Wounded Warriors also won the right to dance with the men of the Shoshone and to recount their triumph.
So I laid down real still, and I'm laying in the rocks, and I kind of had a flashback. I said, the last time I was laying in rocks, I was being shot at. There was no turban and there was no AK, so I figured I was pretty safe. If that offended anybody, sorry.
The members of the losing teams should all now come forward to meet with the women of the tribe.
That's Wyoming Governor Matt Mead in the bright blue scarf. Colorado Governor John Hickenlooper is pretty in pink. And finally, the excuses.
It's the last time I take an offhand shot at 1,000 meters.
I don't know what the spirit of the Oregon Trail did with that bullet, but it didn't let it go into that antelope. It did not let it touch that antelope.
And I'm about ready to take the shot, and I pull that dang trigger, and the freaking safety was on.
There happened to be a freak leftover remnant wind from Hurricane Isaac blowing out of the south. Lifted my bullet right over the back.
Do not go on an anthill that has red ants, because I have bites all over me today.
And I blame the whole thing on global warming.
And joining me in the studio are Scott Talbot, Director of the Wyoming Game and Fish Department, Gary Emerine, President of the Wyoming Outfitters and Guides Association, and Shauna Sherrard with the Sportsman's Conservation Project at Trout Unlimited. Well, you know, the one-shot, of course, gets a lot of attention, but most hunting, of course, is not part of an event. So what I'd like to get first is just your sense of the state of hunting. Where are we at, do you think, Shauna?
No, I think we're in a really good place for hunting right now. We had some statistics come out not long ago that showed an increase, a relatively significant increase in hunting over the past couple years. You know, and we've kind of spitballed what was it that caused that increase, and you know, it's hard to say. Over the past years with the recession, we wonder if it's not people returning to their roots and going back to something they feel comfortable with. But I guess I would like to hear you guys' opinions. It seems to me like we're in a really good spot right now.
Well, how are you doing?
You know, I think we are in a good spot, but there is definitely some issues that lay out in the weeds that we got to keep an eye on. Younger hunters, there's difficulty. There's a lot of competition for their time, whether it be the internet, computers, or whatever. Single-parent families is making it difficult for a lot of younger hunters to start. And obviously, without the younger hunters, we're going to be in trouble down the road.
Yeah, you know, Scott, I looked up some figures on hunting participation over the years, and back in 1975, it was nearly 9% of the population participated in the United States, and now it's down to just some say between 4 and 6%, depending on how you measure. That's really a huge reduction in participation in that time period of roughly 2 generations.
Certainly, and if you look at the recent statistics that were just referenced, hunting participation has increased by about 9% in the last year. But in Wyoming, we're fairly fortunate. We rank number 3 in both hunting and angling participation per capita. So overall, we're number 2 in the United States. So it continues to be a significant tradition in Wyoming, and you can look back to the one-shot, the two-shot goose hunt. Look clear back to the days of Buffalo Bill Cody and the founding of Wyoming. Hunting and angling has always been a very, very huge part of that. And if you look at the culture of our state and the people, when you go into our homes and to our restaurants and our motels, wildlife plays a key role in the identity of who we are as Wyomingites.
Shauna, the Fish and Wildlife Service issued a map of the United States showing how the different regions participate in hunting and fishing. And one thing surprised me, it was about 6% from mountain states where we are. Much higher in the Midwest and the South. The South was almost 11%. Any surprises there?
I guess I couldn't say. It doesn't surprise me. Fundamentally, I think it just depends from state to state on to what degree it's part of that culture. And like you say, it absolutely is part of the culture in Wyoming. Why it's different from mountain states as opposed to the Midwest, as opposed to the South.
Cultural, perhaps?
Perhaps. I guess it's really hard for me to say from one region to the next.
Gary, this must be music to your ears, because when hunters hunt, they also spend.
Correct.
And figures show that they spend actually more than twice as much as an average tourist will spend, in a stay of the state. How do you find that reflecting in your business? Are you on a growth curve or pretty much steady through the years?
Probably fairly steady. I mean, there's up and down years, but they all average out. Obviously, one of the things that does restrict some of my ability to have hunters come to the state to hunt is the draw system. Wyoming is, non-residents have to draw for elk, deer, moose, any species they want to hunt. Some of the areas on the eastern part of the state, it's relatively easy to get a antelope or deer license in those areas, where some of the western part of the state, where there's a little more highly sought after tags, a hunter might have to wait a few years before he has the ability to draw that tag.
So if you had more tags, you'd have more business.
But the way I feel about it is I'd rather keep it the way it is now. I think we're putting enough pressure on those wildlife to increase the number of tags available.
Well, Scott, as you know, the tradition has been that hunters pay their way, in other words, through licenses and fees. That's always been the way it has been, but is that still working now, or what are the strains on that? Because I know you can't keep raising hunting fees.
Certainly, that's an interesting perspective and something the department right now and the commission are looking at, a license fee increase. And under the North American model of wildlife management, the user pays, and hunters and anglers have very generously given to the wildlife resource for many, many decades, and that North American model is, in our opinion, the finest model of wildlife management in the world. However, as you proceed, certainly it appears that it's time that we start looking at some long-term, sustainable sources of funding for wildlife in the state, wildlife management and wildlife conservation. And in this process that we're embarking on right now on funding, and we're looking primarily at another license fee increase. Currently, Wyoming's rates are some of the lowest in the West, and it seems appropriate to adjust them to some degree. But in that conversation, there's lots of folks that are sending us ideas on long-term alternative sources of funding for wildlife conservation.
What would be the consequences if you, if you just couldn't raise them enough to meet the needs of the department, and we're in an era of budget cuts? I mean, would certain areas be closed off? I mean, what would the consequences be, do you think?
As far as hunting goes, I certainly don't see us closing off areas. And from a funding standpoint, it would depend on what services and programs that the public of Wyoming wanted. It's certainly the Game and Fish Department is a public agency, and wildlife is in trust of the state. So I feel fairly strongly that if it comes to significant cuts to the department, that there needs to be a public process in place where the public can tell the commission and the legislature which programs no longer fit Wyoming. And certainly we have a broader way of constituents, anywhere from non-consumptive users, viewers of wildlife, to hunters and anglers, and the needs and the desires of all of those folks are different, and we do our best through the commission to come up with appropriate management guidelines on all the species.
In fact, I was surprised by one thing that I had national figures on this, but that wildlife viewing is in fact the biggest activity of all. It far beats hunting, fishing, or any of the other activities. And some of the national figures that said 71 million people participated in this last year, and they spent $55 billion doing so. So that's quite an economic engine as well.
But if you look at hunting, angling, wildlife viewing, non-consumptive uses of wildlife within Wyoming, we
you say non-consumptive, that means you're not actually hunting or
that's right, not hunting or angling, not actually catching. There's over 8 million people that come to our state last year just to participate in the tourist industry and look at wildlife. Nationwide last year, the estimate is about $646 billion between consumptive and non-consumptive uses of wildlife. So like you say, it's a huge industry. Not only is it a cultural and traditional point for us, it's also an economic driver.
Speaking of tradition, of course, because I've often heard if you want to keep this tradition going, it better be part of a family tradition. Is that what you hear?
Yeah, it seems, if you look at the statistics, and I don't have specific numbers on hand, but typically most of your hunters who continue on as they get older, they cite the reason that they got into it as their family. So if you want your children to become adults who hunt, you have to start them young. You see that a lot with the discussion about nature deficit disorder now, which is amazing because it never used to be.
People suffering from lack of exposure to nature.
Exactly, that's exactly what it boils down to, is if you don't start them young, they will not continue that. They won't develop the appreciation for it. They won't develop the understanding of it. And if they don't develop those things, then what appreciation will they have for it as an adult?
Well, you could start offering therapy, couldn't you?
Yeah.
Cure the nature deficit disorder.
Richard, to follow up on that, the Wyoming Game and Fish Department has recently instituted a new program that we call Forever Wild. Mm-hmm. And we have actually have our employees go out and sit down with families of people, and they sit down and they start at the very introduction, hunter safety, through the license draw process, and bring them, and it's a family organization, a family plan, and we end up taking them to the field.
Well, another thing that you do, which caught my attention, was actually the mentoring program that you started a few years back, because the thing that caught my attention was that I think you were probably trying to aim at younger kids to get them into hunting, but it was adults 18 to 30 that was your biggest group.
Absolutely.
Are those like hunting orphans? Who had no.
That's exactly what they are.
That's interesting because the old saying, "If you build it, they will come." Certainly, people have to have opportunity, access to hunt, access to licenses that Gary mentioned earlier. But in addition to that, they need to have access. They need to have places to go to hunt, and they need to have the resources to do it. And certainly, not many 14 or 16-year-old kids have cars and gas and all the equipment that it takes. But those people that you mentioned,
or high-powered rifles,
except for in Wyoming, and they do have high-powered rifles. But
the knowledge base. I mean, to me, that's the other hurdle is finding the knowledge base. If you don't have a family who that was their tradition, where do you go? I mean, where do you even start? It's a perfect segue. I mean, for the 25, 30, 35-year-olds, if they don't have, they are hunting orphans. They have to start somewhere.
There's some lawmakers who are concerned about that. There is a question on the ballot this year, which I'm sure you're familiar with. It's a constitutional amendment proposal, and this is how it reads. The adoption of this amendment will recognize and preserve the heritage of Wyoming citizens' opportunity to fish, hunt, and trap wildlife, subject to regulation as prescribed by law. Well, that seems to describe the current situation. Do we need to enshrine the obvious, do you think?
I think we should. I think it instills in all generations that have in the past that have hunted throughout the state, and ensures that future generations.
Well, what would endanger it that you would need a constitutional protection?
There's a lot of people out in the world right now that are not really happy about hunting, and along with that, firearms. Firearms are under attack on a regular basis.
But not hunting rifles, though. I mean, I've never heard a proposal to, restrict hunting rifles. I mean, there was a Gallup poll just very recently that said that 47% of adults say they have a firearm, a gun, in the home. But if that's, how many people hunt? 6% or so. So clearly, most firearms aren't used for hunting.
That's correct.
So, I mean, why would a hunter be concerned when there's no threat to the hunting rifle?
Well, I think in a roundabout way there could be some threats. I'm not saying they're on the books right now, but there are organizations that would like to see some stricter controls.
What do you think of the amendment, Scott?
Certainly, it may protect the state from issues like voter initiatives that Colorado went through as far as the trapping of certain animals. And I think it's important that we preserve not only our culture, but the state's ability to manage wildlife populations through hunting, sport hunting, and harvest, as well as other management techniques. And certainly if something like that came along that inhibited our ability to, example, say, control certain segments of populations, whether those be bigger trophy game animals or other wildlife, I think that's fairly important.
That inoculation against potential future threats needed?
I think, like Gary mentions, there's certainly threats to hunting. I think the threats that we face more immediately are a little bit different. We talk about preserving good quality habitat and maintaining open space and being able to maintain the things that maintain our sport, which means we have to think about those bigger picture issues, which may not directly pertain to that amendment, but certainly there are threats that put it on the map.
Well, one thing I did want to touch base with you on is that one of the brightest areas for recruiting new hunters, of course, has been women. I mean, what held women back before? I mean, what?
I think it to some degree it's been kind of seen as a man's sport for a long time, for right or for wrong. And now I think women are not only being welcomed more readily, they're really kind of taking their own initiative and saying, this is something that I want to do. One thing that we're seeing is the local food movement, for instance. We're seeing a lot of people being different people who would have never necessarily taken up hunting come into the fold and say, this is something that I want to learn.
So do you think more hunters are actually going out to put something in the freezer than before?
I think to some degree they are. I don't know that we necessarily see the local food movement as much here in Wyoming as we see it in other states. But I know it is making a bit of a difference in bringing new and different people into the mix.
Well, of course, not too much time left, but one of the headlines, of course, recently was that on the first day of the season, 2 wolves were killed, first time in over 20 years, legally, that is to say, here in Wyoming. Comments?
Well, it hasn't been 20 years. We had a short period of time, what was it, Scott, 8 years ago, 7 years ago?
Remember, we didn't have a legal season at that time. This is the first time in the history of the modern state that we have had the legal take of wolves via hunting, regulated through the Wyoming Game and Fish Commission. And certainly the Wyoming plan provides for a predatory area and a trophy game area. And certainly as of to date, we have not exceeded any of the quotas. We have 12 areas in the state, and we've harvested 23 wolves as of today by sportsman harvest.
I understand more than 2,000 permits were actually issued.
As of today, we have issued 3,914
4,000 just about.
That's right.
Well, a recent report by NBC News in Wisconsin, which also has a wolf hunt, and they have a quota of, I think, around 200 or so. Far fewer permits. I think about 700 at that report. Is it a more emotional issue here than like Wisconsin?
I would say it's certainly a very divisive issue amongst the public in Wyoming, and I think part of that is clearly demonstrated on how long it took us to get where we're at. And certainly wildlife conservation, I think, is very well accepted in the state, and certainly I think that this hunting season has demonstrated that not only is Wyoming's plan a very viable wildlife management plan, but it has reached public acceptance at this point by a vast majority of the folks in Wyoming.
Some of the Midwest states, Minnesota, Wisconsin, those are based on a lottery system too, where Wyoming is just over the counter, where you can anybody can purchase one of those licenses.
Well, we just have a couple of minutes left, so I want you to each tell me what you think the biggest myth about hunting is. Shauna?
Oh, the biggest myth. You know, I think one of the biggest myths is like what you were talking about, that it's not really a sport for women. I think women make phenomenally excellent hunters. I think they, just like they do anglers, I think they have ability to be very in tune with their surroundings, which makes them just tremendous hunters.
We got 1 minute.
The biggest myth of hunting, having been a game warden for many years and an investigator, I'm not sure that I could corner exactly what the biggest myth is. There's lots of myths about hunting, but certainly it's part of our culture and our tradition.
I agree with Scott. There's a lot of myths out there, but you know, bottom line is it's done in the correct way. It's done humanely, and I think that's a myth that needs to be explored.
Okay, we got 30 seconds. So when you're out hunting and you miss, what's your favorite excuse?
Oh, no excuses.
Ooh, wow.
My favorite excuse is that it's Gary's fault.
Yeah, blame Gary.
Well, we come down to the head of the Association of Trappers and Fishers and Guiders. And well, what's your best?
I'm going to pay it back to Scott. You know, the last time I missed was shortly after I let him borrow one of my rifles.
We'll leave it at that. So our thanks to Scott Talbot, Gary Amorine, and of course, Shauna Sherrard. And to our viewers, go to our website at wyomingpbs.org for what I thought was the best pathetic excuse at the One-Shot event. I'm Richard Ager. Join us next time on Wyoming Chronicle.
If we shoot out past our hour, it's a 2-hour penalty.
Yeah, we don't want to do that.
If we get an antelope, it'd be worth it.